And I'd like to introduce Dr. Palpapattu, who is the chair of the department at Michigan Urology, Michigan Medicine, Department of Urology, who'd like to welcome you to tonight's events.
Great. Thank you so much, Mady. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, as Dr. Go said, for our 4th annual Michigan Urology Academy. I want to take a moment to thank both Dr. Go and Dr. Salami, as well as all of our other faculty, residents, and visiting faculty who will be participating as part of today's evening program, as well as tomorrow's program. We've really created, I think, a dynamic, interactive, as well as highly informative program for all of you, sort of dichotomized for early stage students, first and second years, as well as third and fourth years. The purpose of the Michigan Urology Academy is to help facilitate the creation of a diverse urological workforce that represents the communities that we all serve. It's really to give opportunities for everyone, especially those individuals who are coming from medical schools or programs where there may not be that large of a urology department, where mentorship and sponsorship may be lacking, where role models may not be there. And our goal is really to kind of create an equal playing field as much as we reasonably can, and to provide as much opportunities as we can with information, tips and tricks, secrets, if you will. There are no secrets, but sort of some sense of how the game is played, so that all of you can be successful as you can be during the urology match process and during the whole residency training process and selection process. I want to tell you a brief story that really, in some ways, I think is the genesis of this program, for me at least. This program was started as an idea I had when I became chair about 4.5 years ago with Dr. Salami and Dr. Go, kind of brainstorming about what we could do. What I went to medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston in the late 90s and mid 90s, and I remember when I was in your shoes, and you can see me and you see my name, a weird looking dude, a person of color with a long polysyllabic name, certainly standing out in the crowd. Certainly at Baylor in those days, and certainly during my urology residency interview sessions at that time. And I remember at one time I went to an interview, one of my first interviews at that time. This was in 1996, 95, 96, at the University of Florida in Gainesville. At that time, there was a brand new chair there at the University of Florida. His name was Paranchari Narayan, a South Asian man, so from India, had just went there from UCSF. And I remember I walked into his office and it had a bunch of stuff on the walls and on the shelves, stuff that I was familiar with because it's from our cultural heritage, et cetera. He was on the phone with someone, so he just said, "Sit down." So I was sitting down, and I was sitting down really relaxed, kind of slouching, if you will, not my usual, interview pose. And then he got off the phone and we just sort of chatted for a little while, and he asked me some questions, and I walked out of the room 30 minutes later, and I literally thought to myself, oh my God, was that an interview? What just happened? And then I thought to myself, is that how everyone else feels? It was the first time I'd ever been in an academic interview with someone who looked like me, someone who had kind of shared some background similarity. And man, I was so relaxed. My body language was different. The way I reacted was different. My responses were different. I just felt like my normal self. And it really struck me if that's what everyone else feels when they're at those interview sessions, and the power of having a medical workforce, of any type of workforce, that really represents the community that we serve, and the power that can have not only on other practitioners and trainees and students, but also on patients. And I'm sure many of you may have felt this as well, seeing patients, as patients, and going to see doctors who share some commonality. It does not have to be skin color, it doesn't have to be, but you pick it, but some commonness, and the ice that can break, and the feeling of belonging and inclusivity that creates. And so that's really the purpose of the Michigan Urology Academy. It's really to create this robust, diverse urological workforce, to help facilitate this in all the different ways that matter. And really, again, creating these opportunities for individuals just like you, who've chosen to spend your time here with us. And so thank you very much for spending your evening and afternoon and tomorrow with us. I think you'll really find it informative, as Dr. Go said earlier. I really encourage you to please ask questions using the chat box, chat function, as well as raising your hands, as Dr. Go mentioned. And please take the time when the program is over tomorrow to fill out the evaluation tool that you'll be receiving. It's very important for us to get feedback so we can make this program as good and as informative and as helpful as possible. So again, Thank you all for your attention. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you get something out of this, and look forward to meeting with many of you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Palpapattu. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Bresler. She is our inaugural Chief Diversity Officer for the AUA. She got her MD at Oregon Health and Science University and did residency at Loyola University Medical Center. She championed DEI for her entire career and is interestingly also a board certified physician acupuncturist. Larissa Bresler, please take the floor.
Hello, everyone. Of course, I have slides. I'm going to share my screen. Chances are there's going to be a kerfuffle. There's always some sort of electronic thing that happens. I love seeing all of your faces. Let's make it more informal. I'd like to be very thankful to Michigan Urology Academy, and Dr. Gao, Slami, everybody. Your work means the world to me. We will incubate and propagate your work through the AUA, but everything you've done, data that you've presented shows that it works. So for all the students who are here, mentorship works. We are privileged to be here. I'm very happy to be here. So let me start sharing the screen. I bet you I'm gonna have something up, but let me try. It's gonna happen. Computer is very slow. We had a rapid response in urology clinic, so I'm still in scrubs and trying to get going. It's not letting me share the screen, saying I don't have a control. Okay, there we go. Somebody just gave me control. One can share at a time. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Once again, shout out, say things if you want to say something. I'm very happy to be here. I have a ton of slides. I'm going to gloss over some of them so we could just have a conversation. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Students, what do you think? Did minority groups increase in the US in the last 10 years? Does urology workforce composition reflect our patient population? Yes, no, maybe so. Somebody speak, say something. I'm more conversational. I hate talking at people.
No, not really, especially when you look at African American representation and Latina, Hispanic representation.
Brittany, I promise I didn't give her $5 to say it, but she probably seen my presentation. That is absolutely 100% true. As we know, minority groups have increased over the past decades. You know the percentages, and in the US, in urology, these demographic changes have not been reflected. I've reviewed some of European data, and it's not much better there either. More worrisome to me that if I look back at the census from 2014, almost 10 years ago, then an increase in Black urologists and Latinx has been very fractional. So only 2.4% of the workforce of Black urologists and Hispanics, I'm going to use the word that the census uses, please identify yourself however feels comfortable to you. I'm just using the census data language, not to be offensive in any means, and Hispanics were only 4.4%. Now, when we look at the match, because what do you all care about, right? You care about the match, your students. We know that there have been some progress for Latinx community, but that has not been reflected for Black urology applicants. The match rate for BIPOC students is lower, unfortunately. The fraction of students who apply to urology, who belong to minority groups, is lower to begin with. So only 7.3% of our applicants are Black, and only 14% are Latino, Latinx. And then out of those 7.3%, majority match, but if you compare 7.3% to 5.7% who end up in urology residency, I don't know what happens to that 1 point some%. The numbers are so low, so there is a 1.5 unmatched Black urology student walking around there. But we're working to change that. And if there is anything that I leave behind, once I'm done with my position, it would be changing that and increasing representation in urology. Any of you looked at our annual urology diversity issue of AUA News? Yes, no, somebody say something. This was one of the cover articles. If anybody wonders how I feel about these things, I wrote this with Justin Hahn. And there is an opinion out there that this is politics, that DI programs need to close. When I give these presentations to my colleagues, I always tell them I'm going to present the data and what it means to our profession. I'm also going to tell you my truth with the shoes that I walk in and what it means to me. None of this is politics. It's just what our data shows. Bottom line is, those that have feelings about it, who sent me Fox News article excerpts on a daily basis, because you must share that with CDO that I won't have my job tomorrow. I have to remind them that I'm a double-boarded urologic surgeon. Yes, I'll have a job. Don't have to worry about it. I try to explain that these are fears of missed opportunities, which are just not true, because there's plenty of opportunity for everyone to succeed. For all the students who are here, you're the smartest, because check this out. In the next 5 years, about 28% of urologists will retire. This is what census shows. Now, if you look at predictions, in about 12 years, there's going to be 46% shortage of urologists to meet our patient needs. And that doesn't even account for potential baby boomers issues that are increasing with aging faster than we can predict. So you're all in a wonderful position, because by the time that you're applying for jobs, the world is your oyster. You can ask for what you need. I'm very happy to have all of you here, because you're going to write your own ticket. And those of us who say that improving diversity is an academic issue or the workforce issue, it's simply not true. It's an issue of clinical relevance. Studies have demonstrated that diverse physicians' workforce improves health outcomes. It's all about reaching for health equity. And I'm going to speak about it a little bit later on. So I may have published this. I wrote about mentorship and my mentor. They also put my quote up that I believe that persistent advocacy and activism, rather than persistent complaining, leads to positive changes. I also wrote about my mentees, because you truly are the future. That's why we're all here. You may say, oh, advocacy, activism, what is this I'm talking about? How can we make intentional steps towards more diverse workplace in urology? Well, task force. So one of my friends, colleagues, and became a mentor, Dr. Downs, was the head of DEI task force for the AUA. It was assembled in April of 2021, and they published their results about a year later, so last summer. I love this quote that he says that most people in DEI roles within their departments are not allocated protected time or fiscal resources, leading to them not staying in that position long-term. So all of Michigan urology folks who are here, they're here because they believe in you and believe in you as our future. It's not because there's some great accolade that come with this. The bottom line is we believe in you, and we're thankful for you being a part of this program. Obviously, I agree with Dr. Downs, and I put my mouth at the advocacy summit. They probably feel sorry they gave me the microphone, but they did. And if any of you attended, you remember that I was allowed to have one call to action, right? And this was my call to action: champion DI initiatives in health disparities research by supporting protected time and resources for this work. This slide is directly from the Advocacy Summit. And I've already mentioned the task force. Task force came out with 14 recommendations. 13 were board approved about a year ago. And one of these was to create a AUA Diversity and Inclusion Committee and the CDO role. And the task force also recommended for this to be a board officer voting position. That didn't happen, but the CDO role was created as well as the committee. So I'm just going to share with you that this is AUA strategic priority. It's in AUA documents. It's not just words. We, the AUA and Urology Care Foundation, seek to influence and promote highest standards of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the urological community through education, research, mentorship, and formulation of health policy, as well as through humanitarian programs. And they talk a bit about the CDO position. And what I didn't realize is that the CDO is not just a committee chair. It's somebody who has to work with every single council, with every single committee, basically with every single AUA work group to advance diversity initiatives and to bug them, whether they want me to bug them or not, they're getting bugged. And we have a lot of changes that we already instituted. And one of our initiatives is to enhance AUA's ability to attract and engage diverse talent for leadership volunteer position, but also to improve the pipeline. Those of you who have a minute, please read the AUA and UCF diversity statement. It's meaningful. We are committed to intentional actions aimed at being fully inclusive, deliberative, diverse, and equitable organizations. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just take a minute. So I was asked to give a little bit about my journey and my background. In the old Soviet Union, nobody spoke about your ethnicity and your background of my father's generation, those who grew up or were born during the war and right in Stalin's, Khrushchev's time. Because if you admit and were known to be part of ethnic minorities, for example, like Tatars, which is part of me, Central Asian minority, ethnically I belong somewhere there, is that you could be forced out of your nice and warm place and relocated to Kazakhstan because that's where Asianist folks belong, apparently. So nobody spoke about it because you could be sent to war camps, to settlements. Nevertheless, my father was still sent there. So there's a little tiny mark there at the most northern part of Soviet Union, beyond the polar circle, where nobody in their right mind is going to want to live. So they made these settlements in these places that they called settlements, basically gulags, and they schlepped intelligentsia there to work. This is an actual picture of the dam. My dad was an electrical hydro engineer, and they needed somebody to work the dam so that the military and those fancy submarines that were housed over there could be supplied with energy with undesirable folks who belong there, apparently my family. I have a little bit of magnified picture there because it was truly middle of nowhere. It was right there. If you think of Finland border and most northern point, it was the middle of nowhere. I didn't feel that it was any kind of bad because I grew up, I was a kid, everybody looked different there because communists sent all the undesirables there. Every little bird was a different bird and I felt comfortable. So when the Soviet Union fell apart and gulags were opened, my mother died, and in '86, we were allowed to move. And there was some distant family in Ukraine. So we moved to the Ukraine where there was distant family. And I have a little mark there before Chernobyl, and we were about 3 hours away in the university town. Of course, it figures we moved in 86, right before Chernobyl, which happened in April 26, 86. And there I was quickly informed that this little bird was not like the other. And the first day of middle school, the teacher took me by the ear to the sink to wash my eyeballs because apparently black eyes are not natural. She's trying to do something with my eye shape. I didn't understand any of it because I grew up where everybody wore different. I was basically quickly informed that we were non-people. We moved to the States, and once again, not having a green card at first, all of you are aware how refugees are treated initially. We moved to beautiful Portland, Oregon in '93, and had to work full time. Otherwise, if you don't work full time, you don't get a green card. Nevertheless, I worked, I studied, whatever. I got where I got with luck, mentorship, and probably partially because in America, I look appropriate and I don't look that different. My husband had a different journey. All of his avatars for his technology companies was like an older white guy because he didn't want anybody to think that anything was given to him because of diversity or that somebody would assume that he would speak differently. So now I am well-fed, safe in Chicago. I have nothing to complain about. I have teacher bolded because first and foremost, I'm a teacher to my residents. This is a picture of my residents graduating in their very last case. Yes, I have second boards in medical acupuncture. I went to formal school with it, took the boards, taught for the academy, got research grants, and they basically took it as high as possible in that arena and continued to serve as the president of Medical Acupuncture Research Foundation to help others. I cook, I make jewelry, I do a whole bunch of weird stuff, but it makes me feel good. I like feeding people and making stuff for them. My husband says it's my villager wife, it's something from the old country, but it makes me feel good. So if any of you are in Chicago, I'd love to feed you. It literally makes me feel good. So let's talk about the committee and also why I do the work I do. My mother-in-law is the only mom I have, Mama Irene, as many older women. She has urological issues. So she lives in Queens, New York. She asked to see a female urologist, hopefully Black female urologist, and her local healthcare system told her, no, it's not going to happen. And she said, well, what about just a woman urologist? She doesn't feel comfortable undressing, neither do I. And they kind of told her, no, that's not going to happen. You may be better served by our local urologist. And she told them, my baby's a urologist, just like that. Why can't I see a woman urologist? My baby's a urologist. She's the best and the sweetest. And it didn't happen. So she just ends up discussing her CTs with me over the phone because she honestly doesn't want to go see an older guy. And I totally get it. So hopefully some of it helps you understand why I do the work I do. Because my mother-in-law raised me a prince, the best man ever, and she deserves the best care. And she can't get the care she prefers. So we got to do something about it. So the committee was created, 54 folks applied. The moment that they announced that the CDO is a female human, more women applied. That's why we have more women in the committee. We have a ton of wonderful people. We have chair people. We have program directors, society presidents. We have a Gallagher Fellow. Our resident representative, Gabby Gonzalez, is very well published and known. I think 70% or 60% of the committee is bi or trilingual. Many of us are double boarded. So all of these are high achieving people who choose to do this work because we believe in it. Not because we can't hack it in leadership and we just have to do DEI stuff. But these are all wonderful people. And Dr. Tavasilan was the vice chair of DEI task force, and she's a AUA award recipient this year. And this is what happens if you let our committee meet in person. and unleash us. That was really before the AUA. We're a family, we're a group of people who respect each other. We have a ton of work groups. We've achieved about 120 pages of things. The whole educational programming of the AUA has been changed, including changes in core curriculum, guidelines, media, even exam. There are going to be questions on health disparities, and annual meeting programming. Any of you were at the AUA annual meeting? Some of you attended our sessions. I know Dr. Gold presented. It was awesome. I actually voted for your presentation to win, but it's democracy. So anyway, you know, these changes are real. I know some of you were future students. Please speak up. Those of you, say a word. You were a future student. Anybody?
Hello, yes, I was.
Yay! I am so happy you are here. You're the best and you're truly the future. Future urology talent from underrepresented entities. It's the event that we held at the AUA, and we're going to expand it and hold it at every annual meeting, hopefully an advocacy summit with traveling scholarships. And we are partnering with a number of organizations and Michigan Urology. You guys can get the survey from us, Unity and Collaboration Work Group, because we're trying to create unified toolkit for mentorship, but we're also going to have future incubator and the app. And our job will be to amplify and publicize all of these existing wonderful programs, including Michigan Urology Academy. We'll also have an app for mentorship and various groups and sponsorships, giving folks opportunities to publish and present and attend conferences. It's all in the works. How any of this happen? I have to stay up late and write proposals, and then we write proposals, we apply for grants, we get a little bit of money, we make it happen. So we're almost out of time, so I have to tie it up. This is picture from first day. I know Hamed was a little late. I'm sorry you're not in that picture. You can't really see too well. This is some of the day, and we have one of our students dominating on a robot. Yes, I see you there. I know you dominated that robot. We had a wonderful day, and hopefully we can help every single student. On the left, you see Dr. Brian McNeil, who is Leadership Presidential Scholar this year. My former roommate, not to tell any, but yes, he's basically achieved everything. And we talked 20 years ago how we were going to make real changes and change the face of urology. And now 20 years later, he's doing real work. He's a presidential scholar. He's going to lend us some of the resources to amplify pipeline programs. And Dr. Asafo Ajay, one of my program besties, she is not just a Gallagher scholar, she's also a work group lead for pipeline groups. So some of you may get emails from her. And Dr. Flanagan is one of the former presidents who chose to attend our sessions and also trying to help us. I've engaged a number of former presidents to help our agenda, help us with these grants. There are a number of task force initiatives. I have very granular table. I keep track of every single thing that's being done. Those of you who ever did any papers with me, you know that there's going to be checklists, which you will keep getting and getting and getting if something is undone. And unfortunately, many AUA committees are now aware of the checklist and they have to deal with my checklist. But that's how you get things done. I'm not going to go through a lot of it. One of the most exciting things to me is health outcomes metrics. I know Dr. Salami is here, is that I've reached out to general surgery and other surgery societies. None of us truly understand what that health metrics looks like. We have metrics for readmissions, catheter-related UTIs, but we don't have metrics of how hospitals treat our minority patients. 5 out of 7 US World News Best Hospitals provide segregated care. So we got to do something to change that. Yeah, I've reached out to a number of groups, and we're forming a work group with the KIPS, which is quality group, with the data, with research. We already have some access to AQUA, which is our healthcare outcomes database at the AUA. It's going to be a lot of work, and it will take 5 years just to understand what that metrics is like and what can we do from a governmental and advocacy standpoint to change that. I love data, so I'm getting my paws on that. I've also reached out to pharma because I want to know, they have the data who prescribing drugs are. Who are you prescribing these drugs for? Why aren't you giving intravesical botulinum to women of color? So I'm trying to do some reverse work and getting this data from pharma and equipment companies. Why aren't you donating older lasers to places like Loretto Hospital? You know, it's west side of Chicago. Those of you who attended the Innovation Nexus at the AUA, the day before, heard me stirring things up about it, but that's how you get things done. Sometimes you have to ask uncomfortable questions. And should it be my swan song in leadership because I'm stirring the pots? I'm okay with it because this is what matters. Does my microbiome research really matter? Well, who knows? This matters. This truly matters more. We had 214 abstracts that qualified for GI and health disparity categories. We started out with 1 session, and then leadership worked with me to expand it to 5 sessions. We had 2 take-home message sessions. I'm writing quite a few articles about it with the committee. I'd like to leave some time for questions and honest dialogue. I'm trying to encourage my colleagues some understanding of what the data is and what it means to our specialties. Everybody has some implicit biases. That's the way we're made. We're humans, we're not perfect. But you can't change if you don't understand yourself. How do you foster an atmosphere of inclusivity? You do microaggressions training. You guys are including it in Michigan Urology Academy, which is pretty much the only mentorship urological organization that's doing that. And when I did my paper on microaggressions and data, I didn't know that Michigan Urology Academy was going to include it in their training. Now we have to revise it and update it and include it, and actually wrote it with my medical student who started as a first year and wanted to make changes. And yes, protected time for GI work is necessary. If any of you are here in leadership from Michigan, you understand that we need to preach it to the leadership. And we have to fight to have leadership spots ourselves to make these changes. And we need to retain, celebrate, and highlight our diverse urology talent. Well, what have I done about it? The reason we have a North Central Section award for it that Adam Murphy is getting this year is some of us were proposing it for 5 years, and yes, it was accepted. We have awarded the AUA. There's going to be accountability for who's getting awards. Why aren't women and minorities getting major awards? Well, because folks who sit at the big table at the board meetings in the sections are not minorities and women. I'm trying to figure out how to say it in a politically correct way, and I'm sort of failing. Bottom line is that quite often folks are afraid those that they don't understand. They believe that with hard work, you can achieve anything. And somebody interrupted one of my presentations and said, look, my dad was an immigrant, the Polish immigrant. He achieved everything because of a hard work. And I told him, no, that may be true for your father and for you, but it's not true for somebody who looks differently. You have to sit down and talk to my family, talk to my husband, because regardless of how indisputably talented you are, somebody will make assumptions based on what you look like, based on what your name is, based on what you sound like. And many times it's because people are afraid of those folks they don't know and don't understand. It's also something I'm trying to change. And I'm done and on time, and we have 7 minutes for questions. Yay!
Well done. Thank you very much. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat. You can go ahead and unmute yourself as well.
I had a question regarding the match statistics yearly, if that was now going to be more publicly available, or is that just being released to your committee?
No, actually, it's a release to the whole AUA. You can find it on the AUA website. You can see the whole booklet. There was a kerfuffle with how it was publicized this year, and I promise you that's going to change. There's going to be a link in boards to the whole match statistics. I have it written so many things that we are failing matching Black urologists. And we must change that. Yes, we could say that there have been advances in matching women and Latinx folks, but we're not doing well. Matching Black men are the least matched in urology, which is worrisome, alarming, and well, I'm trying to be politically correct because AUA is gonna tell me, oh, there's Bresler speaking up again. There have been changes in the media at the AUA, and absolutely match statistics must be transparent, all of it.
Thank you.
Please ask me anything. This is an open forum and a safe space. Right, Dr. Go, you promised this is a safe space?
Well, I'll ask
Okay.
a question. So the other part of the statistics that make me fairly unhappy is that even if we get Black men into the pipeline for residency, they are dismissed at a higher rate. And that is across the board in every residency. And that is something that's sort of in the system, and no one talks about it.
What do you mean dismissed?
They don't complete their residency, and most common reason for dismissal is professionalism, issues with professionalism.
Yeah, so this is where implicit bias training came across. That's why every single person who sends me Fox News articles and how DI must be stopped, they don't understand their own implicit bias. It has to be required. Some states actually require some of this training to maintain their licenses. The person who speaks about it most eloquently is Adam Murphy, because he's experienced some of it in his residence, and he's like one of the most brilliant people I know. We spoke about it openly at Chicago Urological and created the whole document about it. We need to educate our colleagues. And we need to fight all of those who daily send me those articles and tweets, how the politics of what I do should be stopped. It's not politics, it's data. We need to take better care of our patients. We need to have diverse workforce to reach for health equity. It's not politics, it's human rights. So the more of us that speak that language, the language of human rights and not bipartisan politics, the safer our resistant colleagues will feel hearing us. That's just my opinion, and what I'm basing it on is I've given a lot of presentations to various leadership groups, and in many of them, I was the only one of my kind. And urologists are used to understanding data. They don't want to hear opinions. We are all taught that opinions don't matter, that data matters. We have Namrita who raised her hand.
Yeah, I also think there's a question in chat that was before me as well. If you
Yes,
wanna
how
address
I
that.
incorporate acupuncture. So I have a couple of funded research projects and papers. There's data supporting it for chronic prostatitis, chronic pelvic pain syndrome. I am on a guideline panel for the chronic prostatitis, chronic pelvic pain. Acupuncture will be a part of it because there's strong randomized prospective data on it. There's tons of data supporting it in, for example, cancer recovery and pain. There's also data supporting it for bladder pain. And this was what my study was. So as a woman in urology, 16 years ago, only woman attending, all of bladder pain patients were sent my way because somehow I am to treat these patients. So I got additional training, and all of our patients that have unexplained systems that we can't surgerize, fix with surgery. That's why I got trained in acupuncture, and that's how I incorporate it in my practice. Namrita?
Yeah, I actually had a question about the DEI research and whether there is actually more research investigating what exactly are these barriers. Are they at the medical school level, high school level, undergraduate level that are preventing certain minorities, such as like African-American men, to match into urology?
Yes, there's that data. It's not in urology. There are a number of articles and various hypotheses about what is the issue with the pipeline. If you want to read good urology summary, I recommend just going to AUA website and looking at 2022 diversity issue. There's very elegant summary on the pipeline and what happens with the pipeline and how limited resources, social determinants of health, influence our health outcomes. They also influence our life. So some of these factors are because of where you grow up and your resources and systemic racism, but also systemic understanding of leadership of those of us who are others. There are a number of very elegant Times articles and others describing pipeline issues. Oh, that's wonderful. Ashley, thank you. That's a good paper too. But is there a specific research asking urologists for their attitudes? The answer is no. Why? Because it needs to be a funded study with the questionnaire. I'm working on some of it with Amanda North and data, and I'm trying to approach some of it from the carrot, not the stick standpoint. So if I prove that diversity programs mean something to you, to students and residents, then the practices and organizations are more likely to include programs and intrinsic bias training because they're experiencing shortages and they need to hire more people. So I'm trying to do something about it and approach it from data standpoint because that's the language that my colleagues speak. They don't walk a day in our shoes, so they don't understand these things.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so my email address is on the AUA website, also on Loyola websites. It's lbresler@lumc.edu. And there are several students in the group, you know, that if you email me, I will answer, right? Speak up for it. Some of you are here, and if there's anything I could do to help you, I absolutely will. But also listen to your mentors from Michigan Urology Academy. They will help you. Somebody else raised your hand. Nicholas?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bresler. Just one question. When we think about the recent events with George Floyd and diversity being put to the forefront of most faculty's minds now, I feel like in the most upcoming years, we've had such a great pushback on why is DEI important. So like, what has been your response to those faculty members that are so ingrained within why are we doing this in the first place, and how do you advocate for this important work, especially at certain institutions that don't necessarily believe in it? I feel like in our today's political environment, it's such a uneven playing field, and I feel like it's hard to advocate for this space.
it's a loaded question, and it's something that maybe Simpa and maybe you can help me talk about, because I'm a very friendly conversational person. So people feel very free expressing their opinions to me, sometimes too free, because they assume and they have said that this little immigrant girl should just feel lucky to sit at the big table. Sometimes Dr. Messing reminds them that, no, I have $2 million in funds and 2 boards and I belong. So I had to learn how to speak data versus speak opinion. Data shows that more diverse urology workforce provides better care to our patients. They care about patients' data because that's what gives them money and recognition. So I speak data. They are not interested in my feelings. And the type of articles I get almost on a daily basis is some of my friends, I showed it, and Dr. Asafo J, who's also at Loyola, she's like, I can't believe people would share this with you. They do. And I have to tell myself it's not personal, it's fear. A lot of it is fear of lost opportunities. And I just have to be very honest and authentic and speak data and speak my truth, which may not be somebody else's shoes. I cannot speak the walk that I didn't walk. We have a few other hands. Dr. Gao, would you mind helping me moderating? I don't see the whole screen. I have a tiny little computer because I crawled out of VA basement clinic. Sorry, conditioner is not working. You know, VA. So
yeah, we have Adidayo, Aditunji. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Dr. Bresler. Thank you so much for your talk. My question is, I know in the last, in the recent matches, a lot of Black DOs haven't matched compared to Black MD students. I mean, overall, the rate has been the rate of Black students matching have reduced, but specifically Black DOs. I wonder if it's something you've looked into or if that's part of your scope, and what steps you think you plan to take on that.
Excellent questions. There is data showing that DOs, by just having that number, my best buddy is a DO, some of the best acupuncturists are DOs. Urologists have an intrinsic bias thinking that somehow DO education is less. It's an old school opinion thinking that if you couldn't get into med school, you went to DO school. So how do you change it? You do intrinsic bias training. You keep elevating DOs in urology leadership. You include DOs in programs such as Future Program. It wasn't just for MD students, for DO students. You change it little by little. And trust me, it's going to change because we're going to face so many shortages that even those who are old school, and mind you, many of them will retire in the next 5 years, will change their tune. And change is a process. It's a long process, which requires all of us. Somebody quoted me that I say that it takes an army of urologists, allies, and industry supporters to change generations of inequities. And it's going to take years, and it's going to take an army of us. And the fact that you're asking this question already means that you're part of this army. So educating program directors, publicizing it, writing about it, showing, elevating DOs in leadership position in urology, all of those changes that are palpable and can take effect. The other things that are going to take years to change some minds, and we're working on it. My question to you is, what would you propose we do? Because young minds sometimes have the best suggestions.
I would suggest, number one, having a committee of an osteopathic committee within the DEI, where they reach out to schools to increase awareness about urology, because you find out that a lot of DO schools don't have a home urology program, so the students aren't introduced to urology as early as maybe some other programs, and they don't have access to research. So if you're in your third year, you don't have research, you're not able to create a good application to even apply in the first place. So probably have an osteopathic committee within the DEI, and then their task could be specifically to reach out to those DO schools and try to have conversations about the barriers to their students being interested in urology, and just start from there, creating those conversations, and also increase, I think the biggest thing I would say will be research for DO students. Honestly, if they can start early, that would be a good start. Yeah.
So mentorship and sponsorship, and including
Yes.
DO.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, not a single DO applied for my committee, and we have reached to every single urologist. And the opinion was it's a lot of work for nothing, because I did ask several DOs to apply for the committee and they didn't. So the fact that you're being part of this conversation and willing to do this work is already making change. So as soon as you match, apply to be a resident representative on our committee, because we need DOs there.
Yeah, I will.
We have more hands, and I think I'm way out of time. Forgive me.
We'll take one more question, and then I'm just going to put in a plug. So we just finished our first in-person MUA, and that was designed for someone without a home urology program. So we'll keep you guys posted about how that goes for these 12 individuals. But that's exactly who we're after right now. I'm going to give it to Nana.
Well, one more thing, be on the lookout for our app. We're going to have our future app and incubator. So if you're interested and you don't have home urology program, you will find yourself a mentor, and a capable mentor. We're developing it now. It's going to take a couple of months, but we're on it. Okay, Nana.
Hi, Dr. Bresler. My name's Nana, and my question hopefully will be quick. I just wanted to know if there's any plans to do anything in terms of mentorship for us students interested in urology at the regional level by the AUA. So not, national meetings, but more, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, those kind of things.
Absolutely. I've given presentation to pretty much every single section encouraging this. The mentorship program, the app I'm talking about, is going to be for any student within the US or Caribbean to do mentorship throughout the year, not just yearly. We already encouraged and written to the sections to have their own mentorship event, and also to subspecialty societies. So you don't have to drive or travel far. I'm also applying currently for a grant to get a traveling scholarship for mentorship events at the AUA Summit, and get you to meet the leaders and get you in advocacy where you truly know the leaders and have some changes. But all of this takes time and funds. We're on it.
Thank you.
There's also Urology Unbound, of course, and Prospect, a number of other programs, and we will publicize every single one of those. So you will have one-stop information on the app about all of these programs. And if none of them fit you, we will fit you for a mentor, and we will help you.
Thank you, Dr. Bresler. All right, so our next part is entitled My Journey in Urology. This part will feature two speakers. So our first speaker is Dr. Nyame, who unfortunately will not be able to join us tonight, but he did take the time to record his talk. He's an avid supporter of the program. Dr. Nyame is an assistant professor of urology at the University of Washington in Seattle. He did his residency at the Northwestern University, and his med school, at Northwestern University, and then residency at the Cleveland Clinic, and went on to do fellowship in urologic oncology at University of Washington in Seattle, where he stayed on staff. He's a surgeon scientist. His research is focused on healthcare disparities in urologic cancer. So it's my esteemed pleasure to introduce him and present his talk. So I'm going to share his recorded talk, and if there's any issue hearing him, please do let me know.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nyame. I'm a urologic oncologist at the University of Washington, and proud to say this is my third year participating in the Michigan Urologic Academy. Before I get going, I want to say thank you to Dr. Salamasi, Dr. Gao, and Dr. Palpapattu for the invitation, and more importantly for hosting this event. Being able to see participants in this program matriculating into urology residencies has been really exciting. And I have to say that this academy itself has inspired our program here at the University of Washington to think about ways that we can also support underrepresented in medicine populations in finding urology homes. So it's actually kind of late here in Seattle. I was asked to talk about my journey a little bit, and really with an emphasis on mentorship and sponsorship, two really important things. So I guess I'll start at the very beginning. I was born in Athens, Georgia, to parents who had emigrated to the U.S. in the late 70s. My dad had come here for school. My mom followed afterwards, and they actually got married in Georgia. And I think that's a big part of my identity. I think of myself as Ghanaian American. My dad and family had to leave the country when I was 4 for visa issues. So I lived in Brussels for a little while. I lived in Ghana for a little while. I speak Tree, the language of the Asantes in Ghana, and so again, it's what I grew up around, as Ghanaian culture and American culture, and sort of the fusion between that. And I think that really knowing who you are and how those experiences add value is important. I was really lucky to have a dad who was a PhD and a scientist. My mom actually became an RN when I was in high school. And so I had this foundation for understanding that, if I truly wanted to work hard, that I could achieve and attain, any of life's goals. So I think that's where it starts to get tricky, though, right? And so this conversation is a little about life journey. So I went to Duke University for undergrad, and I showed up on campus, and I'd been sort of a top student in high school, and all of a sudden I was really struggling. And one of the foundational mentorship groups that I found to be helpful in me becoming a successful college student was actually my peers. And I'll say that because, my peers are the reason I pursued a master's degree after college at GW. My peers were a big driving force in how I thought about medical schools and what medical schools I could apply to. And ultimately, my peers in medical school are the reason I chose urology. I started off really wanting to do neonatology and when I started medical school, and then I had this anesthesia fellowship that I did as a summer student between first and second year, and then I was like, I'm for sure going to be an anesthesiologist. Actually, I sort of stopped the search at that point. And then during third-year rotations, really enjoyed the surgical subspecialties I rotated on. Actually, my favorite rotation was GYN. And for those of you who are familiar with Northwestern, it's a really big and busy service, especially on the OB side. And that was a lot of excitement. But I still, as I sort of finished, rounded out, came back to anesthesia, and I thought that's where I was going to be. And during my anesthesia sub-I, right before I took a year off, I just sort of found myself looking on the other side of the curtain a bunch, like, oh man, they're telling me about how much does this patient weigh, and how much do you think we can give on this dose, and was this fast? And I was just like, I was far less interested in sort of the inner workings of anesthesia than I was surgery. And it was at that moment that I sort of had the switch go off, and I said to myself, well, I think I'm going to pursue surgery. And I was taking a year off, so it kind of worked nicely. But it was my peers who, you know, three of my close friends from medical school, all had just gone into urology, and I remember just thinking, like, what do they know that I don't know, right? And so I think really the significance of an event like this, you know, this academy, is that you're building your network. And remember that, you know, it's your peers are often a really safe place for you to share your ideas, your concerns, your passions, where you want to be, who you want to be. And, you know, I think can be a tremendous resource for you as you think about what the next steps are, you know, as you pursue this process. So also think about your peers that recently graduated, you know, medical school and matriculated into urology programs. You know, pick their brains, ask them about their experiences, because those things are really important. And sometimes your peers can give you the inside scoop, especially the ones who are now at new places, about what it takes to succeed, you know, at the institutions they're at, you know, what the culture is like. And I would say listen to them, you know. And the second thing that I think about my life journey, I mean, I was very lucky to go to a very specific medical school that had a very big urology presence in Northwestern. And I don't take that for granted, because truthfully, you know, had I not been there, I'm not sure if urology would have ended up being in my path. So I got lucky in a lot of ways, right? And when I say like a really big urology presence, like for a long time, Northwestern and UCLA were the top producing medical schools of urologists. And the year before I applied, 13 people, 13 applied to urology. So it just was a really popular field, and the urologists, I think, were easy to relate to and were really good mentors, which really takes me into phase two of sort of my journey into urology. You know, when I made the decision, I approached the department, and the first person to really support me, besides my peers who were connecting me with like fellows, residents, you know, faculty that they knew, was a woman by the name of Kelly Ross, who's still at Northwestern, and she's the program director for the residency. And she, you know, I saw her very recently, and I asked her, like, why, you know, why did you just put everything you had into making sure I had meetings with all these people, and, you know, met all the residents and had the schedule of when conferences happened. And, you know, she just went above and beyond in supporting me and making me feel like that the field was for me, and connected me with my first real urology mentor, Adam Murphy. You know, I've said this for a few years now, but Adam is the reason, you know, I became an academic urologist. You know, I looked up to him. He, you know, at first when people were connecting us, you know, I was like, oh, you guys have so much in similarities. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, we're both, you know, Black, and I guess he has an MBA, so that's like a lot of similarities. But it didn't take long for me to understand that, like, Adam's passions, the way that he approached science and urology, like, really aligned with my own work ethic and interests. And you know, he was very early in his assistant professorship, and he still took me under his wing, showed me the ropes, and really committed to me, you know, in a way that's, now that I'm in this position, I sort of sit back and say, wow, like, you know, picking up a Saturday, meeting me at a coffee shop to look through my data code and talk about, you know, our analysis, and help me write a paper. And the first few papers I wrote with him were terrible, and he was so patient, and, you know, like, a lot of feedback, like, no, you can't write this, you can't, you know, like, you just helping me understand prostate cancer disparities. At the time, we were doing research on vitamin D. So a mentor like Adam fundamentally changes your life, man. And for me, being able to connect with somebody that could pour into me as much as I was pouring into their projects and passion, etc. Someone that could help me with my professional development, that could tell me, what to expect as I went through the process, how to become more resilient in ways, a sounding board. In fact, in my toughest days as an intern in a second year, I'd call Adam and say, I'm about to lose it. And, am I being unreasonable? And, he always had the right words to talk me off the ledge and help me sort of get recentered. Again, if it wasn't for the luck of getting into a certain medical school and the luck of being paired with a really fantastic mentor at the right time, I'm not sure if I end up in academic urology. Maybe I'm a neonatologist or an anesthesiologist. Once I got into residency, which was a process again where it was community. I mean, my peer mentorship group, as I like to say, were completely fundamental in helping me understand the process, which programs to apply. I had Adam Murphy as a mentor. I had actually 2 faculty at Northwestern who were much more senior, who were supporting me as well, Dr. Brannigan and Dr. Gonzalez. And so they helped me figure out, what sub-Is to do, all the things, which programs to apply, and they advocated for me. And so that was really helpful. As I think about that process of getting into urology, I think it's a job. And within that, I think when you show up for sub-Is, you got to go 120%. You can't have off days. You can't have off time. You got to be on. And so just think about that carefully when you think of the number of sub-Is you do, where you do them, because you have to impress entire departments, right? But I think if you have the right mindset and the right mentorship, people telling you what to do, what not to do, how to succeed at a particular institution, that can really help you find your way. So once I matched, I was really lucky. I matched into one of my top programs, and I was really excited. That's when a whole new level of, I think, career development occurred. First, you got to learn how to be a doctor, right? Which I remember, folks saying that to me when I was in medical school and being offended, like, I'm in the hospital all the time. I know what being a doctor is like, it's very different, your intern year, the feelings that you have when you have to make decisions or when you have certain responsibilities, it's just different. And again, I was able to rely on peer mentors and Dr. Murphy, but I also realized that to succeed at the institution I was at, I had to have very specific mentors that were there, that could show me the way. And that was actually hard for me. I identified with a lot of faculty, but I also, there are ways that I felt like, some of the faculty that I really admired were also not approachable for various reasons, mostly because they were so busy, right? It's hard to be like, hey, very busy surgeon who's already mentoring, like, a bunch of more senior people, like, do you have time for me? I was very lucky to be in a residency structure that had a mentorship built into it. So we had a class mentor. Mine was Dr. Sandip Vasavada. And so that was really nice. Hopefully, more and more programs that you're going to matriculate into are going to have that kind of structure. Because having that class mentor did give me someone to be like, okay, like you're assigned to me, man. So I'm coming into your office if I don't understand something or if I'm having a tough day. And that went a long way to sort of helping me find my way in that first year, year and a half. And then into second year, Manoj Manga became a mentor and a little bit of a friend, and that was actually an interesting part of training, right? Because he's your boss, but like we played music together as part of this group of residents. And so sometimes your mentorship comes in in a social way, right? I had like a now chairman, right, was even then the director of endourology at Cleveland Clinic, as someone that I could really rely on for a research project, for some career advice. And as a second year, I was spending a lot of time, second and third year, I spent a lot of time in his operating room doing endo cases. So it just seemed like cultivating that relationship was really, really helpful. And I think, there are very clear boundaries between faculty and residents, but there are ways to find the people that you gel with, the common interests, and within the constructs of those boundaries, figuring out ways to build meaningful relationships where people get to know you, so that when they're supporting you, they're not just supporting like your CV, but they're like really supporting you. And so I think, that comes organically in a way, I think, but you got to work at it. And one of the things I've said, I think, in the past year is that I was definitely coming out of an experience during my year off. I did an MBA program at Northwestern, and MBAs were all about networking. It was like 24/7. We actually didn't have class on Wednesdays, so we could network on Tuesdays, Tuesday nights to be very specific. I think I got comfortable with the idea of like, if you want to, you have to like kind of cold call or like walk up to people and say hi. I did that as a resident multiple times, and I think that's part of that relationship building, right? You hear someone talking about jamming, and you're like, oh, I play the guitar. Maybe, hey, what are you guys talking about? You talking about music? Yeah, what do you like to listen to? Sometimes they're going to be like, it's going to be a chief and your, most senior faculty or someone. They may be like, hey, intern or second year, don't you have somewhere to be? But I don't know. I mean, there's a feel for it, and I think self-advocacy in those arenas are really important. But probably the biggest mentorship, and really it was a sponsorship ask that I had in residency, was to Eric Klein, my chairman at the time. And as a third year, I think he presented some data from a friend of mine from Hopkins, who shall remain nameless. I was like, Dr. Klein, wouldn't it be cool if you had my name on one of your slides as like a project that you thought was really high quality? Saying that out loud sounds insane, but I was like, yeah, like, wouldn't it be great if you mentored me through something that you were so proud of? You like presented it, and he looked at me, he's like kind of side eyes, like he's like, yeah, okay. I was like, well, I would really love to talk about being mentored by you as I approach my research here and have an opportunity to do something impactful, and then he, and this was actually one of my favorite things about my mentorship from Dr. Klein, was that he said, I'd be happy to, but I'm going to have some asks of you as well. And so he had some specific things performance-wise he wanted to see me do better on, and he held me accountable, and it actually it made me better in a lot of ways, that I had that extra pressure. Like, I knew that I wanted to improve on my in-service score by a lot, because he'd asked me to do that, and really, it just was great. And I learned a lot in that fourth year as a result of that accountability. And the other thing is, I think mentorship and mentee relationships are bidirectional. So, I felt like if I asked him to help me figure out a way to do something that would have impact and would be meaningful, then I had to do what he asked me to do. And sure enough, at some point early in my fourth year of residency, he was like, let's build an active surveillance cohort at Cleveland Clinic. And I was able to lead that project with some of my co-residents, and that was a really great experience, and led actually to just more opportunities to do some meaningful research as a result of just doing what I was asked to do, and because of his mentorship, which then really evolved into sponsorship. And so when it was time for me to look at fellowships, now as in my assistant professorships, I'm not oblivious to the fact that I'm very fortunate to have a sponsor like Dr. Klein, who who may nominate me for something in the AUA. He's asked me to guest edit a special issue for the Gold Journal, and then offered me a position as associate editor. One of those moments that was really meaningful to me is I had a really big publication in 2020, and I paper comes out, and I'm like, I wonder if people are going to notice, right? And the first email I get that morning is from Dr. Klein. It's like all caps, congratulations. This is a big one, with exclamation marks. So it's just been a great relationship, and someone that I looked up to for his, his abilities as a clinician, for his leadership and research, and I'm just really lucky to have him as a sponsor. Then segueing, now to University of Washington. I mean, I'm here with John Gore and Dan Lin, two people that have been incredibly instrumental to my early career and just so supportive. And I can't say enough about what they have offered me at this phase of my career, both as career mentors, as research mentors, as sponsors. Again, replicating a lot of the things that Dr. Klein and others, Dr. Manoj Manga, have done for me over the years. But I think a lot of that has come, by putting myself out there, asking people for time to chat, making inquiries. I found out about University of Washington really as a program of interest during a visiting professorship, and I immediately asked the then visiting professor and now my boss, Hunter Wessels, to connect me with the oncologist, because I really believed in his vision for the department. And I think that's an example of, going out on a limb, knowing how busy chairmen are. He could have said sure and not done it, or somehow could have slipped through the cracks, but I stayed squeaky and not too pushy and just patient, and eventually that email went through that connected me to Dan Lin and John Gore. So and the rest is history. So that's sort of my journey, to this position. I think it's easy to look at this process and continue, and because of how hard it is and how hard you work, to sometimes just say, oh, look at what I've done, and look what I'm achieving, and those things are true. But I think if you really want to take this to your maximal potential, what you'll recognize is that by doing the right things, by being true to who you are, by working really hard, by building relationships where people get to know that you're genuine about what you do and how you do it, that your success really reflects those that are elevating you, those that you don't even know about. And, there are like a million other names that I feel like I could mention that I feel like are just supporting me, even though I don't have like direct ties to them. People at other institutions that, I think, when they say, well, who could give a talk on prostate cancer disparities? When they're in the room, they're going to say, hey, actually, there's a young guy in Seattle that you might want to look at. And at least now your name is on list of potentials. And it doesn't guarantee anything, but at least you're in consideration. And those things again happen by investing in relationships. So don't, in the current age, don't be afraid to cold email people. You might not get a response, but you might get a response, and that might lead to a fruitful virtual conversation or two that might prep you for a sub-I at that institution, or might get you, if you never know. I mean, you just never know what these conversations and these reaching out will do. And I think there's an art to it. So I certainly, being polite and professional and brief in your communications is important. But I think that putting yourself out there can go a long way. So that's me rambling for a really long time, it feels like. yeah, I wanted to share that little bit about myself. I'll make sure my email is available through MUA, and I hope everyone's having a fun time in Ann Arbor, and learning, networking, and building those future relationships for a future career in urology. So again, thank you to the organizers, Dr. Salamasi, Dr. Gao, Dr. Palpapattu, and have a good night, everyone.
All right, that was very informative and insightful and inspiring. So we'll introduce our next speaker, and then after he gives us his perspective, then we can take some questions. So our next speaker is Dr. Kelvin Moses. Dr. Moses is an associate professor of urology at Vanderbilt University. He's a fellowship-trained urologic oncologist and the fellowship program director at Vanderbilt. He did his med school at the Baylor College of Medicine, residency at Emory University School of Medicine, and fellowship at Memorial. And since he started a faculty position, his research interest has been in healthcare literacy, cancer outcomes, advanced prostate cancer, but with special focus on health disparities in urologic cancers. And it's our privilege to have him with us today and to listen to him. Dr. Moses, you have our attention.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank Dr. Salami and Dr. Go and the entire MUA faculty for inviting me. I think this is a great venue and event for you guys, and it's certainly something I wish I had coming up. I'll basically cover some of the same themes that y'all presented, and I'll go ahead and give you the punchline now. There's going to be people at almost every step along the way who tell you that you can't, you shouldn't, or you won't. And those people will find you. And then there are people along the way at each step who can serve as mentors and support. And a lot of times you will find them, as y'all said. And then sometimes you just end up sort of in the same pool together. And so use the people who are your haters as someone who pushes you to do even better. And maybe even find some flaws that you can improve. And then use your supporters as someone who can push you in ways or promote you in ways that sometimes you don't even see. So my story, my family is from Georgia. My dad worked for the railroad, and so we moved a lot growing up. I went to 3 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 3 high schools. And because of that, I was always pretty good at meeting people quickly, but I was never good at establishing a deep relationship. And so my ability to sort of cultivate long-term relationships didn't come from my youth at all. But it was always throughout the Southeast. My mom was a teacher. Every time we moved, I would get put in the slow kids class because the assumption that I was a Black kid from some other Southern state. And my mom would always have to come in and say, nope, you need to challenge him because otherwise he's going to talk your ear off and bug everybody. So all through school, I always had straight A's, and my conduct grade was always an F or a U for unsatisfactory because I was bothering kids. And it wasn't until later in middle school and high school where I started taking more challenging classes that I got my act together. My parents went to Fort Valley State College, now university, and Tuskegee, both historically Black institutions. And so when I applied to college, I only applied to HBCUs, mostly because from the time of most of middle school through high school, I went to predominantly white schools. I was usually the only Black kid in my class, or maybe 1 or 2 others. And so I wanted that experience. So I ended up going to Morehouse College in Atlanta. Because I moved a lot, I ended up taking almost 2 years of chemistry and less than a half a year of biology. So I decided to be a chemistry major. And I was a music minor and Spanish minor. College was a great time, and it was the place where I met my best friend, who is still my best friend. He's a general surgeon now. And it's also where I cultivated my interest in medicine. After during my sophomore year, a woman named Gail Slaughter came up and gave a talk at Morehouse about the summer program that she runs at Baylor. And I happened to have been out of town that weekend when she came. And so when I got back, my chair of chemistry said, "Hey, you need to call this lady. I think she's got a really good thing going." And so I called her, and we ended up talking for an hour. And what I didn't realize is that was an interview. And at the end of it, she said, "I don't have any money for you. I don't have a lab for you. But I'm going to send you an airplane ticket. And by the time you get here this summer, I'll have something for you." And she made it happen. And that really kickstarted my career in medicine. So I got to Baylor, did some summer research, but as part of the program, we met several clinicians. And I also met James Phillips, Dr. James Phillips, who had been recruited to come to Baylor for diversity. And I'm going to age myself a little bit, but this was 1994. And at that time, there was a program called Project 3000 by 2000. They wanted 3,000 African-American students in medical school by the year 2000. And the president of Baylor at the time was on the board of that particular program. So he brought Dr. Phillips there. And Dr. Phillips was a very politically savvy guy. He was very opinionated, but he had a way of making you believe everything that he told you. He was also empowered, and you'll see along your career, there's a whole lot of DEI chairs and diversity people and this and that. And a lot of them are like empowered in name only, or are so comfortable in their position that they're not willing to shake the tree a little bit to make things happen. Dr. Phillips was very empowered, and he was also very opinionated, and he really just didn't take no for an answer. And if you ever go to Baylor, they have all the graduating classes on the wall, and you can see literally the year that he showed up. And then you can see when the new president came in and forced him out. And the face, literally the color of the classes changes. My first year medical school class had 18 Black students and 25 Hispanic students. In the fourth year medical school that year, there was one Black student, uno. And so he literally made a huge difference. And he was a big advocate for me. And so I spent the summer there. And then I came back the next summer because I knew Dr. Phillips. He got me into a program that was really designed for like the rich private school kids in Houston to get something on their resume to get into medical school, called the DeBakey program. You've heard of DeBakey forceps, DeBakey clamps. So Michael DeBakey was a cardiac surgeon at Baylor, and he designed this summer program where kids would come for a summer, shadow a surgeon. And basically, I mean, we did a whole lot that probably would never get away with now, but so I came back that summer. I worked with a cardiac surgeon named Rafael Espada, who's from Guatemala. And he expected me to work as hard as his residents did. Most of the kids, again, these were local kids, rich. So they would show up at 9 o'clock, attend a case or two, and then take off. I was showing up at 4 and 5 in the morning, rounding with the intern in the ICU. I was operating all day. He was like a madman surgeon. He would do 2 or 3 bypass cases a day. And in between, he would run over to the main hospital and do like a hernia and a gallbladder and something else. And then he expected me to round with him in the evenings. He did not believe in elevators. And so he had my fat butt running up and down stairs. And so I was working 20 hours a day the entire summer. And every day he had some new project for me or topic that he wanted me to present on. But so it was a great experience, and it taught me how hard you had to work in medicine. This was pre-work hours regulations, so the residents, I mean, they lived there, and but I loved it. I really did, and I really liked cardiac surgery. And so that summer, I interviewed while I was at Baylor that summer. And so I actually got into medical school by October of my senior year. I was set. So I actually only interviewed at 4 places. And because of Dr. Phillips and my research experience, I applied to an MD PhD program. And I didn't get in. I got conditionally accepted. And so my first year, I had to do well enough to get in the program. And so first year I had to kind of kick ass and make sure I got in. And so I matriculated through the MD PhD program. The way Baylor was set up, our didactics was only 1.5 years. So I did do some of my clinical work before going into grad school. And then I eventually joined the lab. I wanted to be a cardiac surgeon. And so I joined a cardiovascular development lab. My mentor in grad school, he was a well-known scientist, and he was well published. I'm not sure he knew how to mentor. And so I had to sort of struggle through grad school. The other thing that happened is in grad school, we had a tropical storm that went through Houston, went up to Dallas, and then came back to Houston. And we had severe flooding, and it flooded our animal facility, and it killed my project. All of my mice died. And this was far enough into grad school where I couldn't just quit and leave. But it wasn't far enough to where I could at least write up something and come out with a master's. And so I basically had to start over, and it added 1 year. But what it did is it allowed me to start another project that was a model for early prostate cancer. And so that was my first foray into like a urologic topic. And so I finished a PhD, came back to grad school, and when I came back, one of my cardiac surgery mentors pulled me to the side. He was like, "Hey, there's no Black cardiothoracic surgeons in Texas, right? And you're going to be going into uncharted territory." Simultaneously, during that time, it was hard to find cardiac jobs just to begin with. There were a bunch of PGY 14s running around doing their 3rd fellowship because they couldn't get a job. And so early on, I was like, maybe I'll look other places. I'll look at something else surgical. I did ortho, because by this time, my classmates are now like 3rd and 4th year residents. So I was like not coasting, but they were giving me sort of juicy cases. So I went to ortho, one of my best friends, and I did a knee replacement from skin to skin as a 3rd year medical student. And I thought to myself, well, if I can do this now, like, what else is there for me? There's not a lot of growth. I rotated on ENT. I walked into the room. This is before robotics, and they were doing a base of the tongue surgery. And if you've ever seen any of the old school pictures, what they do is they cut the mandible and then split the face open to get to the base of the tongue. And I walked in, it looked like Silence of the Lambs. And I was like, this is not for me. And I walked right out. And so then I did a urology case. And it was actually pediatric urology. And I was like, oh, this is pretty fascinating. And then I went to the adult side and did a cystectomy with Seth Lerner. And I was like, I found my home. And it was kind of ironic because, first day of medical school, everybody's like, oh, what do you want to do? What do you think you want to do? And I remember very specifically thinking, well, I'm not going to do urology because who wants to play with dicks all day? And here I was liking it. It was just kind of ironic. And some of my friends reminded me of what I said. At the same time, I had several friends that went to urology, including John Gore, who y'all Nyame just mentioned. He was a couple of years behind me. But by the time I came out of grad school, he was already matching. And so I had some mentors in urology, specifically David Roth, who's a pediatric urologist, and Brian Miles, he's a prostate cancer guy. And they really got me through. I didn't have like a stellar step score, but they really supported me. They showed me which programs I need to do. Again, they showed me the value of hard work. I remember Brian Miles coming in one day and he just saw me eating lunch. And he's like, "What the hell are you doing here sitting where I can see you eating? Go work." It didn't matter that it was lunchtime. It didn't matter that everybody else was eating. He just wanted me to make sure that when I do my away elective, nobody sees me eating, nobody sees me going to the bathroom, nobody sees me yawning. Like he and at first I was kind of annoyed or insulted, but I knew exactly what he meant when I got to my away elective. My my school did not offer me a interview initially because I didn't make their step score cutoff. And both Dr. Roth and Dr. Miles, as well as one of the residents, Mo Kira, who is a men's health specialist now, advocated for me, and I got an interview. My dean told me I will never match in urology. And he very late in the game said, you should think about applying somewhere else or some other specialty. I did my away at Emory. Again, my family's from Georgia. I was looking to kind of get back closer to home. And so I still went through the process. I got plenty of interviews. I went all over the country. And I ended up matching at my #1 spot. And I very intently brought my acceptance letter to the dean and said, "Thank you for all your support." And so I finished up at Baylor. I went to Emory. It was a challenging time. It was when work hours regulations were first being quote unquote enforced, but programs were sort of behind the curve. And so again, working hard, just getting killed. And it just happens that my intern year was the year that my mentor, Viraj Master, started. And he and I have very similar practices now because of his guidance there. So some of the early papers I wrote were with him. I was also a Capture Scholar. That was a program out of UCSF. They had this huge database, prostate cancer database, and they gave funding for, I think you had to be either a 3rd or 4th year resident. And so Viraj was my local mentor, but my capture mentor was actually Dave Pinson, who is now my chair here at Vanderbilt. So he was my early mentor. And I actually didn't even meet him until AUA like 2 years later, but we emailed back and forth. And so that was sort of the start of my research career, and particularly interest in prostate cancer. And mine was looking at differences in treatment between Black men and white men with prostate cancer. And so we got a paper. I remember Viraj like shredded it, ripped it up. Pinson ripped it up. Who's the chair at UCSF? Simpa, or the former chair. Pete Carroll ripped it up. I probably rewrote that paper 20 times. So finally it got done. I submitted it to JCO, which had one of the highest impact factors, and it was accepted without revisions. And that has never happened again in my career. But again, there's times where you're going to be challenged, and it was worth it. What I also saw during that time is one name or two names really kept popping up over and over again. It was Willie Underwood and Isaac Powell. Willie at that time was brand new faculty just out of his Robert Wood Johnson Fellowship, and Isaac Powell, who was one of the early Black urologists in the country, they were both at Wayne State. And as y'all said, I cold emailed both of them, and they both responded. And Willie has been a mentor of mine ever since. We talk every couple of months. We've done several papers together. Every time I see him, he still challenges me. He's like, you need to read this book. You need to do this. You need to serve on this committee. You need to apply for this. And Isaac Powell, same thing. Like I'll call him every once or twice a year. And it just really sort of a good example for me. So I did my fellowship in Memorial Sloan Kettering. Challenging time. Again, they didn't care about hours. They didn't care about anything. Get the work done. And so you really got my butt kicked there. But I had several mentors there too. Harry Herr, who's one of the most internationally renowned bladder cancer specialists, and Joel Scheinfeld, who's a testis cancer specialist. Again, they pushed me hard, and I got some really good publications out of it, met some good people around the country, and they really supported me when I was looking for jobs. So again, it goes back to that mentorship. I was named chief fellow at Memorial. And I remember in the locker room one day, one of the thoracic surgeons, he pulled me to the side and again, your haters will find you. He was like, they only named you chief fellow because the guy that they wanted left and you're the only Black guy there. I was like, okay, whatever. Well, one, he was wrong because I wasn't the only Black guy. Brian McNeil was there with me, who Larissa mentioned earlier. But two, Scheinfeld pulled me aside later on. And I don't even think he knew that guy said anything to me. He's like, you know why I picked you chief fellow? And he said, you're a smart guy. You work pretty hard, but you're a little bit of an asshole too. And he said, you'll see in leadership, and when you have to make hard decisions and tell people, what to do or get them right, you need to be a little bit of an asshole, but you need to be respected. And I respect you, and your fellows respect you. And I needed to hear that because, again, there's going to be people who will tell you along the way, again, you don't belong, you don't deserve this, you don't merit this. And you'll also see along the way, there's going to be people who will be named the chair of this or the head of that or the director of this. And you'll be like, damn, I've done way more than that person. How the hell did they get that? And it's because there's somebody above them that has put them there. And it's okay, but you'll see that merit only goes so far, and really it's more about the relationships you establish and who you know and where you train. And at some point, grades don't even matter anymore. Nobody's asked me my step score in 20 years. I don't even remember my step score. I know it was not great. Nobody asked me what I got on my in-service scores. It's all about your production. And so I'll go back to what Larissa said about mentorship and the importance there. I finished fellowship. My first job was unsuccessful, and I don't talk a lot about it because I don't like being negative about it. But there were people there who had regressive attitudes that in my younger years I lashed out a lot more furiously than I do now. And I knew that was not productive for me or what my goals were. So I ended up at Vanderbilt. And again, so Dave Penson was here. I already knew him. And then Joseph Smith, Jay Smith, who was the chair at the time, who is like a brutally honest guy, but like one of the nicest people you ever met. I admired him from afar, number one, because I did IVU Med. I did an international trip when I was a resident, and he was active with that. And he travels back and forth to several countries in Africa and South Asia. But he was known around the country for being honest and upfront. I mean, he would be the kind of guy to come to someone in his faculty and say, hey, you know what? You haven't gotten a raise in 3 years. I'm going to bump you up 20% just to make a difference. And I bet you there's not another chairman in the world who's ever said that. If you can get somebody to work for you for free, you'll do it. But for some reason, he does that. And so he became a mentor. Dave became a mentor. And I think I've done pretty well in my career so far. So I think I'll actually wrap up there because I want people to ask questions. But, really cultivate those relationships. There's people who email me now, and I can't answer everybody. I can't mentor everybody. So I'll point them in different directions. And y'all is not on the phone, but there's been times where I've put y'all up or Simpa or, Christina Billabor, make phone calls, put people in the right places. And so, develop those relationships because they'll follow you the rest of your life. There's people that I was on the interview trail with, and I see them still at AUA to this day, and we catch up. So, develop those relationships and then embrace your haters. Like take that critique, that insult, that whatever, and make you greater and let your production and your light outshine their darkness, Just use that. So I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. Very insightful and inspiring. We appreciate those motivational advice, pieces of advice. So we'll go ahead and take questions. Maybe we'll start with Namrita.
Hi, yes, I just have to say, Dr. Moses, your talk was really resonated with me, I think, because I grew up in a very similar situation. I've moved every 4 years, and since 2017, I have moved every 1 year for my job, and before that, for my dad's job. And so I think I'm at the point that you used to be, where I have trouble forming deeper connections because internet wasn't a thing when I was growing up. And neither did Facebook or Twitter. So I was actually wondering, it seems like you've had really great mentors and some not so great mentors. How did you engage with these mentors to kind of advocate with you? How did you maintain those relationships long term? And then what made those great mentors really great? I know that's a big question.
No, but I know exactly what you mean. So what makes a great mentor is it's a reciprocal relationship, right? And I like the way y'all put it with Eric Klein, like, okay, I'll mentor you, but I need you to do this, this, and this. So the good mentors will maintain communication, and sometimes you have to initiate it, but you'll maintain communication on a regular basis. They will help you plot out a pathway, whether it's just for a summer or for 5 years. They will challenge you. They'll give you goals and objectives. They will socialize with you, like sort of take you under their wing. And so if they're at AUA and they're going to a reception and they know some of the big wigs are there, they'll bring you along and say, hey, meet my guy here, meet my lady here, meet my person here. But you have to produce for them, right? So when you say, I'll have this done by June 30th, you need to have it in their email box or on their desk by June 28th. If they say, I want you, I need you to raise your scores up here, or I need you to talk to this person, or I need you to do this, you get it done. And so as long as it's that reciprocal relationship and there's always a forward motion, I think that's a good relationship. Bad mentors are the ones where you can't get a hold of them. They have no vision. They can't give you constructive criticism. And again, you can still learn from people like that. I remember my chief at the VA in residency hated me and I hated him. And I thought he was an idiot. He tried to get me fired. But I learned from him too. And sometimes it's like reverse learning. Like I do laparoscopy the absolute opposite of the way he did his because he was so terrible. And I speak to veterans in a certain way, completely different from the way he did because it was so patronizing. And so it's like a, you remember in math, a negative sign. He's like a negative mentor to me because I can still remember things about him that I don't want to mirror. But again, going back to the mentorship thing is 2 ways, and you'll need multiple mentors at different phases of your career and at different intensities, right? Like some people you need to speak with every 2 weeks, even if it's just to like pick you up off the floor. And some people you catch up once a year at AUA. David Roth, we have breakfast every year at AUA before he retired, but we communicate by text, but that was our way of catching up. Whereas with Willie Underwood or Penson or whoever, I talk to them, quite regularly.
We'll do 5 more minutes of questions. I know, Dr. Bresler, you had a comment in the chat, a question in the chat. Maybe if you want to voice it out as well.
Dr. Kelvin Moses,
hello, Larissa.
2018, one of the smartest and most powerful people in our class.
Hello.
I'm a total fan, as you know. I'm gathering these stories to be a better mentor from all the folks who had to overcome to become a urologist. What do you think was the most pivotal thing in your career to elevate you? For some people, it's AOA. For some people, it's a big grant. Simpa had that pivotal paper, but we had conversations at North Central section years ago that his work with Chris Gonzalez and my buddy Adam Murphy was most helpful. What do you think this is? Because this is something that I want to share with mentees to help them along the way.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely that JCO paper. I remember when I got to Memorial, like some of my co-fellows were like, "Oh yeah, I saw you had that paper at JCO." Like it was sort of it was pivotal. Like that's the word to use. And it set me up for all of my future work, right? So it established me as someone who had knowledge in prostate cancer. It established me as someone with serious research street cred, even though I already had a PhD and I had some really good publications even before that. But that was like the major fork in the road where I was viewed as like an academician. And then everything that has flowed since then really set me up for the leadership class. I did the AUA exchange. All of that sort of flowed from that point. So that's why I say, if you say you're going to work with someone and you want to do a research project, like, don't get mad when it comes back bloody red, like just make it better because it can really set you up in the future.
Great.
Hi, Dr. Moses. I
Hello.
really appreciated your talk. It was very helpful. It definitely resonated. My question goes more to throughout your journey and having to come up against some of the microaggressions or just overt people being angry at your success, or even just based on the different racisms or their own biases. I know that a lot of times you said you just moved on, but also in addressing it in those moments, how to best navigate, especially if it's someone not only who's your co-resident, but someone who might be your superior.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I handle it better now than I did as a younger man. Again, I probably burned a few bridges with some choice 4-letter words early on and telling people where they can go and how to get there. With microaggressions, at this point now, I just kind of let it go. I'm like, you know what? I'm better than you. Like, whatever. I'm better than you. With macroaggressions, I will call that out. And I'll, even if it's a superior, I remember when I got to fellowship, one of our attendings liked to call the fellows boy. And he was one of the very powerful ones. And I told him first day on service, I said, you will not call me boy. Period. And he didn't. And we still talk every few months to this day. So you have to address things head on when it is sort of egregious and not even if it's just for you, but I've seen patients being treated a certain way, and you have to call that out too. Now, there's a way of professionally doing that and not flying off the handle. But sometimes you have to kind of come home and find your cocoon, and whether that's your friends from college or your family or the pet or your spouse or whatever, like, you have to unload that because people will load you down with all of their negative energy, and you have to find a way to unload it. Otherwise, it will build up and explode out at the most inopportune time, because it'll only take like a little tiny thing to sort of set off the spark. So find your way of unloading and diffusing things. Understand that, with my background, for me to get to the same table that the person that went to the posh private school and went to Harvard and went to all of this, and we're at the same table and they had no obstructions, I am better than they are. They may not believe it. They may try to erase it from history, but I'm better than they are because I'm at the same table. And sometimes you have to embrace that. Okay. If you're the first woman somewhere and you're sitting at a table full of guys where everything's been handed to them, you have to understand that you're better than them, because you from the time you were 2 or 3 years old, you were shunted into this box that everybody wants to put you in. And so when you start to embrace that, then you can sort of move. It's easier to move on from that. If you view yourself as a victim or as less than, or I don't deserve to be here. And you will get that sometimes. There's times where you'll feel that, but it's going to take that self-confidence to get past that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. And there's a question in the chat about what mentees can offer mentors. Thanks, Dr. Bresler, for answering that question. So students, feel free to take a look. So we'll take one more question and then we'll call it. And the question will be from Michelle.
Hi, Dr. Moses.
Hello.
So something you mentioned during your talk that really resonated with me was that you felt like you were navigating uncharted waters throughout a lot of your training and kind of finding, especially in that like point of medical school when you're trying to find a specialty. So my question is, do you still feel like at this point in your career that there's still some aspect of your professional life where you're charting, or you're going through uncharted waters? And if so, how have you been navigating and addressing that?
Yeah, less so now. I mean, I'm quote unquote mid-career, or I'm associate now. So I have to figure out, do I want to go for a full professorship? Do I want any other leadership roles, either within my department or within the Southeast section or the AUA? I'm learning things outside of medicine, and I don't know if this is really going to be a part of the Michigan Urology Academy, but I'm learning more about money and finance and, the things. I'm trying to think on a bigger scale, right? Like, when you're a doctor, you're basically at the grassroots. You're treating one person at a time. And my goal is to like get the right people in the right place where it's an impact much more globally, right? And I don't need any glory to do that. In fact, if nobody ever mentions my name, I'll be super happy about that. So that's kind of where I am now, really, is sort of how do I think on a bigger scale? And I'll give Brian McNeil credit, the guy that Larissa mentioned. He said, a lot of people don't know who Vernon Jordan is, but he is the one who helped broker a meeting with Bill Clinton and, the Prime Minister of Israel. And he was the one who got the Democratic National Committee to look seriously at Barack Obama. And he was the one, and like all these things in the background, nobody, very few people, at least, in the popular press know about Vernon Jordan. And so I think that's where I am now as far as uncharted. Now, the other thing I still pay attention to professionally is I need to make sure I'm teaching as best I can, making sure that I'm passing on what I learned from my attendings, again, professionally and personally. So I try to give them good advice. I have babies, and so, my focus now is my family, and that's obviously uncharted, dealing with toddlers. So, there's all these things that you have to kind of put together. But as I said, each phase of life, you'll need different outlook, different mentors, different examples, so that you can say, okay, this is what I did in the past, here's where I am now, and this is what I can see for my future. But you always want to be looking, I have a 5-year plan, or really a 6 years, because at 55, I want to be retired. And so what do I need to do to be ready financially, personally, and professionally to transition to that point?
Thank you.
I'm going to answer Nimrita's question about without a home program. So that's where the cold call is important, right? So emailing and say, hey, I'm at such and such program. I really want to do some research. I want to see, urology at a ground level, and make sure that I'm meeting those people. So that's where it comes in.
Thanks, Kelvin. Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. Much appreciated.
Good to see you. Thank you.
See you too. Dr. Go.
And now we're gonna go into the small groups. Dr. Aslami is gonna open up the breakout rooms. You're free to move between the rooms. You guys are gonna be able to move yourselves. We're gonna go a little bit later to make up for the time that got lost. So we're gonna try to go till 8:45. So don't feel like you're not, this will not be our only opportunity to interact. So feel free. And if you want to jump from room to room, feel free to do that. All right. And the room's open.
Yes, they are.
Go ahead and move yourselves. The speakers will move themselves as well.
I'm sorry, Dr. Gao, I have to split off. I haven't had breakfast yet today. Please forgive me.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're the best. MUA is what it's all about.
Thank you.